Oksana, can you hear us? No, no. We may have to move forward with, I know Oksana's here, but I think that there might be some audio issues. I believe, Kimberly, I believe that we're prepared to talk about the form-based code today, right? Or Samantha? So.
Actually, so I was going to just give a kind of quick update on that, but we were switching gears a little to the mixed residential and industrial overlay districts for today's focus. And maybe you can chime in a little bit here, Doug, as well, just on exact timing, but just to give everyone up to date, we have met with the ordinance committee twice in the last, I think it's probably been the last 6 weeks or so that we had 2 meetings with the ordinance committee regarding the form-based code. We have sent along I'll call it a final draft of the form-based code to the town. And I believe Sarah at that point was distributing it to the group. And this is where I'm going to rely on you, Doug, with regards to timing of next steps. I think it was going to the town board to set a public hearing, the town board meeting in June to set a future public hearing. But I don't know if you have the specific dates available for that.
I don't have the specific dates. I believe that is the plan, is that the July town board meeting, knowing that it may be either July or even August for consideration by the town board. But I think generally speaking, that's the timeline. The ordinance committee I know has reviewed it. Thank you for attending those meetings and working through it with the ordinance committee. And I know there's been, it's a big project because it's something very, very different. But the town board meeting for June is June 21st. The town board meeting for July is July the 19th, just kind of looking at dates here. So theoretically, we would be hopefully having a public hearing in July. I know we've got an extra week this week, so we're still working on resolutions for the June meetings, but I believe that is the plan, just because the way the calendar falls for the month of June, with the third Monday being a little bit later in the month this month. So.
Okay, great. Okay, so any questions on that before we jump into some of the new discussion? Okay, so I'm going to share. Oh, so is Oksana the host or are you the host, Doug?
I am the host, but let me here. I'll fix it for you.
Okay, thank you.
Go ahead. You should be able to now.
Yep, perfect. Okay, so hopefully everyone can see the PowerPoint.
Yep.
Okay, so as I just mentioned, today's discussion, we really want to focus on kind of the shifting of gears from the form-based code, which we've spent a lot of time on over the past year or so, into some of the other zoning districts and updates within the Uptown corridor area. And the intent of today's meeting is really, we've had a couple preliminary high-level discussions, but we really haven't gotten into any of the specifics within these 2 areas, the mixed residential and the industrial district overlays. So we're going to kind of walk through a lot of information, which will be probably too much to really absorb today. So our plan is introduce information, have a discussion around certain topics that will help us to refine the actual written code updates that we've prepared. Based on discussion today, we'll make those refinements. We'll send hard copies of the 2 districts out to this group, and then we can plan to meet again in a few weeks after you've had a time to review them in more detail to really go over any further comments or changes. So again, just a quick recap that we've been referring back to, the revised zoning, the recommended zoning is based on the Uptown Corridor Master Plan, which included future land use character areas, which you can see here. So the areas focusing on today include the areas in yellow that were identified as future residential areas, as well as the Office Employment Center, which is the business park district, and then your industrial districts. So starting first with the mixed residential, So just a reminder, as we took that character area map and refined it into an actual zoning district map, you can see the areas that have been designated for mixed residential, and those are indicated in the bright yellow. So both sides of Thomas Road along Brickyard Road, and then within the area immediately adjacent to our form-based code district. So again, the form-based code includes the areas in red and kind of this orangish tan color, I guess you would call it. So this is really a transitional residential area immediately surrounding the form-based code district. Again, this really was, you have your multiple residence district already within your code. The overall use with some modifications and design intent are very similar to what we've talked about doing within this mixed residential district. So we use the multiple residence district as a base. So unlike the form-based code, which is intended to be its own standalone document as part of the overall town code, this district will be incorporated into your existing zoning code as a new district within that code. So this will fit right into your existing framework. So all of the other references as it relates to other standards within your zoning code would apply to this new mixed residential district. The biggest change between your multiple residence district and the mixed residential district that we're proposing here is the current district allows townhouses, apartment buildings, and two-family dwelling unit structures. So in this instance, we are adding single-family dwelling unit structures as a permitted use. And then we also, and we can have further discussion on this, we did talk about briefly at our last meeting, as we started some preliminary discussion around this, of also incorporating some smaller scale commercial uses into this district to complement residential and provide an opportunity to continue that mixed use character that we're proposing in the form-based code overlay area. So using your existing code terminology for permitted uses, we have added stores selling convenience groceries, meats, baked goods, and other food items, eating establishments, retail-oriented commercial, and personal service-oriented commercial. And those are abbreviated, but within the code, the retail-oriented commercial would include stores selling home and business goods, such as flower shops, medical supplies, clothing, gifts, electronic equipment, and office supplies. And the personal service-oriented commercial would include laundromats, dry cleaners, personal care services, postal services, and fitness studios. So any initial reactions to the permitted uses that are identified here? And again, I can go back to the map so folks can see. So this would be the area here, kind of sandwiched between the business park and the industrial. And then again, this area to the east of the form-based code district along Fire Hall Road.
Back to that map real quick, Kimberly. So we're discussing the yellow area, not the orange area, correct?
Correct. The orange area is included in the form-based code. So this is the yellow area.
Kimberly,
And this
my other question would be to, if you look at the plazas around 332, I know they're more occupied than we have occupied in the city at this point on the, where Ryan's Liquor is. Well, my question really is there a pressing need for additional retail? Because that strip mall model is kind of an old model, right? So are you talking about incorporating them inside, adjacent structures similar to the residential look? I'm just trying to feel that I'm not a big fan of strip malls anymore.
Yep. No, but I think that's a good point. And because the form-based code district, which is the red and the orange, allows for a lot of flexibility with, the range of uses, and it really is based on building type. The goal though being that that would help to facilitate more of that high density mixed use type development, particularly in this orange area along Fire Hall Road, where you would see a combination of higher density residential combined with some supporting commercial uses. And while, at one point we had originally, and this is a great discussion, because while we had originally thought about these yellow areas as primarily residential and really building on that mixed use district, going from maybe higher density residential to lower density residential, so you might have some multifamily and then transition to townhomes and then to single family homes. There was, it was brought up last time that we met that it might be good to still allow for some level of smaller scale commercial. So, I think the discussion now, and a good point that you brought up is, do we still agree that that makes sense to add additional opportunities for commercial? We could add parameters and maximums to the size of these commercial uses so they are in keeping with a more residential character, or do they not make sense at all? And we think within the form-based code districts and the 332 corridor, the Fire Hall Road corridor, that we will be able to absorb enough commercial use that we can really keep the yellow mixed residential area to a variety of different types of residential units.
I would think maybe the personal service category might be something that should be included with the residential, but the retailer oriented commercial, it seems like there's plenty of space along 332 and that tan district or area, directly behind it, that maybe it isn't really necessary to have retail oriented commercial. Kind of what Greg was saying there.
I had a question. So like with the two family dwelling unit structures, would you need something outlined if people might want to run businesses out of their homes? That might kind of stay a thing, whether it's a bakery or flower shop. Would you need special permission to have a business in your home, or is that something we wouldn't want?
And that would be still classified as a home occupation.
Okay.
So all of the regulations within the town's existing code would apply to this district as it relates to home occupations, as it relates to any of the supporting parking or any of the supporting regulations.
What if we had something like a apartment building that had a gym in it and they wanted to allow outside memberships? Would that be a retail oriented commercial use?
I would think that would just be a supporting use within the apartment building. And maybe that's a good question for Doug, or I don't know how you address that now. I think that's a good question, and whether we need to clarify that, but I would think that would be appropriate.
Or would it fall under personal service?
That's what I'm kind of wondering.
Well, and I guess my question is, I can definitely see adding the single family dwelling unit structure to the permitted uses. But let me throw this question out at you. Do the rest of these uses become specially permitted uses by the planning board, giving the planning board the discretion to be able to still entertain something, under the zoning, but at least giving some flexibility that way?
It's not a bad idea. You get a review in the process.
Well, I have a thought with some of the commercial uses as well. So just sort of thinking forward, if we were to find a single family developer, they wanted to purchase land in these areas and build a community, if you will, or a neighborhood, would they be concerned about having a convenience store or a restaurant next to a, what costs today $300,000-$400,000 single family home?
Well, it's so much commercial along 332 and immediately behind it. Would anybody really benefit? I mean, somebody developing a convenience store or something, would they even bother? I mean, seems like there's so many other opportunities in that area that it might not even come up. I mean, using a special use permit might be a way to go, as Doug suggested, so.
Well, and I think Kimberly's earlier point about making size restrictions could really help. I mean, it's a very different situation when you get, you know, a very small little, almost like a bodega sized convenience store as opposed to something a little bit larger. They have very different impacts on the neighboring properties too.
And I agree with both Terry and Adeline. It seems to me if you're trying to build a community, for example, one of those plots is relatively large, you would allow like pods. I think in terms of pods of commercial use, and I can see having things that could be within walking distance, which is a great thing to have in a community, having a bakery or a small store or a flower shop or a coffee shop, things like that. And I agree that those should be special use type entities.
Okay, so if it makes sense, why don't we go back and rework the language to, we'll add single family dwelling unit structures to the permitted uses. We will make the other uses special permitted uses, and we will integrate size limitations regarding the size and scale of those types of uses. And then once you get that language, you can dive into a little more and see if it works and meets the goals for this district.
Sounds good.
Okay.
So, hello, this is Cal. Can you just tell me how intense it is to do a special use permit? I mean, is it lengthy and you got to jump through a lot of hoops? Can you describe that process to me?
Let me jump in with that. So it's actually a pretty straightforward process. You make application to the planning board. There are some basic things they want to know specifically relative to the proposed use and especially permitted use, kind of what you're doing. If it's like a home business, you know, kind of what you're intending, the traffic, that sort of thing. Or if it's a, you know, it's relatively straightforward, Cal.
Okay.
In terms of time, it probably would take 30 to 60 days, just to be honest, by the time you make the application and you go to the planning board and then you get the approval and then whatever conditions before you can start. But it's a relatively straightforward process.
Okay. I think my concern was that it would be an encumbrance, you know, it would just take too long. But if it's something that's relatively smooth, you know, I certainly can support that. Thank you.
Okay, so with that, this is going to be probably much too much to absorb on a slide on the screen. So I'm not going to go into this in too much detail, and this will be included in the draft that you get, and you can really kind of pore over the details from this. But again, you know, a lot of these with regards to the bulk and use requirements started with the existing multiple residence district, and then recognizing there is a desire for a little more flexibility with regards to density, maybe smaller lots, more dense development programs. We did reduce some of the minimum lot requirements. And this is maybe more, the one thing I did want to touch on here has to do with the maximum building coverage on lot, which is how your existing bulk and use tables are set up. We would traditionally have a maximum impervious surface percentage for the total lot, not just the building coverage. So we can either continue kind of working within your existing framework with the maximum building coverage on the lot, or we can look at maximum impervious surface coverage. And I don't know, Doug or Shauna, if you've been able to dig into this yet. I don't know how long you've been on board with the town. So I don't want to put you on the spot if it's not something you've dived into, but I don't know how the town currently is addressing if they don't have percentages for maximum impervious surface, how you're currently addressing that in your reviews.
So Kimberly,
Or if
the
you're
only
not.
place, the only zoning district right now where we have maximum lot coverage is our residential lake district, where we do have maximum lot coverage percentages. The rest of the town, all the other zoning districts, it's a maximum building coverage on the lot. So it's really, I guess it's whatever recommendation this group wants to make. It's, you know, the lot coverage was something in the RLD that we implemented a couple of years ago that was new. Prior to that, the town had always just had this maximum building coverage on the lot. So the lot coverage aspect was the newer way to do that. And we had introduced that in the RLD, but we haven't done anything in any of the other zoning districts yet.
Okay, thanks, Doug. No, that's good context. And I don't know if anyone has any initial reactions on, you know, approach, or if they have a preference.
So I just want to back up just for 1 second. And the vision that I had in my brain, and probably is incorrect, was Uptown was going to be kind of a self-contained enterprise. By that I mean you could do most of what you needed to do in the course of a day to keep going to the next day. And that means like walking to places, that means enjoying the parks, that means enjoying the other things that are in that district, that area, Uptown. And nowhere have I heard a conversation yet about traffic counts. So Burn Dairy would never put a Burn Dairy on Emerson Road, not up to Emerson, I'm sorry, but across from Thomas, whatever Thomas becomes on the other side. Is it Emerson? I think it's Emerson.
Yeah.
Anyways, they, you know, because the volume of traffic's not there. And we don't talk about it. I haven't seen it even in the, you know, the forum discussions. There's just, and you got to plan for that. And I kind of reflect on 3 areas I've lived in my life, more than 3, but the one I reflect on here is Celebration, Florida, which was a Disney town, is all planned, you know, I don't know, 5,000 homes, whatever it was. And they always had clusters. And I think that's what we're trying to describe here, is a cluster that serves the community that lives inside that community, some additional benefits of that. The other one was in Tokyo. We actually had a, when you walk away from the station, you're walking everywhere in Tokyo, and the vision here is that we should be walking everywhere here, especially to the parks, not getting in our car to drive, that kind of thing. And I think that there'll be an openness to that. But we also had, and you have public services or someone, public uses in here, essential services. We used to have, you know, a cop every 4 blocks in a hut, and he would be there all day long, right? And my point is that if we can think collectively about traffic and the services needed for this concept, which I fully support, right? It may help us come up with a better result. That's all I'll offer.
No, and I think that's a great point, and really is kind of the underlying premise of the Uptown area, right? Where you're seeing concentrations of that diversity of uses within all of this red and orange area. So, you know, allowing for a diversity of commercial types, with maybe those that require the higher traffic counts happening along 332, with those that are maybe supporting what we hope will be, right, a denser, expanded residential base in this outlying area, all still within kind of a walkable proximity to new personal commercial eatery type uses along Fire Hall Road, along Emerson Road as well. So I think that exactly what you described is the overall vision for Uptown, and the premise for really creating that form-based code district. And then these outlying districts really being able to support that form-based code district and really ensure that it is ultimately successful and does allow for that range of support services, because there is a more substantial residential base that's able to support it. Does that make sense?
Yeah, but my comment will be, I agree with everything you just said. Then there has to be a but there, which is they're going to walk there. That's the assumption. We're going to use our feet more than our cars in this zone, right? And we got to also make sure we have transportation capabilities inside that for people that want to go, I don't know if you guys have ever run across 332 at prime time. It's a tough street. Not as tough
Yeah.
as 5 and 20 and Eastern Boulevard, but it's a tough street you can cross. And this past weekend, I went to Maze, and my wife talked me into walking over to Tom Walls. And you can't walk over to Tom Walls. It's a little bit of work to do that because it's
Yep.
traffic and the speeds and all those kind of things. So as we think about that, I think we just got to keep that in mind. I'll stop there. Just say that you got to keep in mind that it's a complete unit, and let's play to the strengths of the unit versus trying to force a strength in a unit in a certain district in a certain way. That's all I'll say.
No, this
Okay.
is one of the areas that the Complete Streets group really was focused on also, Greg. So,
Right.
I mean, it seems to me that would have to come into play.
Right.
Doug, aren't there some drainage issues up in this area that for some reason when you come in looking at maximum coverage, impervious coverage on lots, seems to me we've heard Jim talk about some drainage issues there.
Yeah, depending
am I
on so
mistaken?
this whole area is, a lot of it is in the Route 332 drainage district, and obviously we've got some ponds that are actually functioning as Route 332 drainage stormwater pond, essentially, that are up with a park built around them there at Blue Heron Park.
Yeah.
But there are some wetlands in some of the different delineated localized wetlands that have been identified on some of the parcels that we're talking about for development, even with the map that Kimberly is showing there and everything. But I think it's all stuff that can be mitigated, Terry, to be honest with you. And obviously, it's
Oh,
something-
yeah, it would come up for review. Absolutely. Yeah. I just wanted to toss it out there.
And also just keep in mind too, I mean, Kimberly, obviously you, I, and a lot of other folks with the original project team with this, we'd walk 332 and everything. So that's a lot of what we're trying to incorporate, and from the traffic aspect into some of these other areas and everything. So it is a good reminder, but that's kind of the basis of why we kind of started down this path to begin with here too.
Yep. Okay, and again, I don't know if anyone has experience, with projects in the Lake District that looked at maximum building or maximum lot coverage versus maximum building coverage, and if there's a preference on which way direction we ultimately go with that. I don't know if there's any initial reactions.
And then Kimberly, if I think another question that I have, I see you have maximum building height for an apartment house of 35 feet. My guess is we're not going to get too large of an apartment, but I also believe that the plan, correct me if I'm wrong, is to have the higher buildings closer to like Fire Hall Road towards 332. And then as you transition back, that the building heights get lower to kind of taper back into the other areas, right?
Yes, no, and that's a good comment too, and one for further discussion. Recognizing, and we do have obviously some frontage here on the roadway, but again, with that form-based code allowing for the higher heights, I think we went up to 65 feet.
We did whatever the hammocks was at.
Yeah, so it was either 60 or 65. I'd have to go back and double check that one. But so the thought was, if we've got that higher height within the form-based code district, that maybe we would want to taper down as we get into the mixed residential district. But if that's maybe 45 or 50 for apartment buildings, not the 35, that's certainly something that we can modify.
Yeah, that's a good point, Doug, because if you're going to do a 2-story, let's say, building, and you wanted to have a decent pitched roof on it so that it looks aesthetic, so it looks nice. You might go higher than 35 feet.
Okay. Okay, well, what we can do in the interim is we can actually put in percentages for both maximum building coverage on lot and maximum impervious surface. And then based on your more detailed review when you get the hard copies, and we can discuss that further, how we want to ultimately land as we move forward at our next meeting.
Kimberly, what do, in terms of maximum lot coverage, I know in the RLD, I think we're at 15 and 25%, but that's because of the sensitivity of the parcels adjacent directly to Canandaigua Lake. What do other communities do for a maximum lot coverage in a parcel that maybe isn't adjacent to Canandaigua Lake, like what we're talking about? So.
Yeah, and because again, this is an area where we are thinking, right, higher density, but we also want to make sure we're incorporating green space and allowing, smart growth design. I would think we would probably be in maybe for, impervious surface coverage, a maximum in like the 70% range, 60 to 70.
Well, a quarter acre lot for a single family home, quarter acre is about 10,000 square feet. So, you're talking, so you'd be talking about 7,000 square feet of coverage, which would be pretty high. I mean, just typical 2,000 square foot house. If it's a 2-story, it's probably got, a 1,000-foot footprint and then a driveway, so.
Yeah, and the 60 to 70 might, I was thinking more of the commercial. You might be down to more in like the 50 for residential, but because you're including your driveways, you're including any accessory structures.
Right.
But the other calculation is also related to what Terry brought up, which was stormwater runoff, right? And how that gets handled properly, that would be the driver, I thought. The ability to handle it in the community you're trying to put it in, right?
Right.
Well, and to that point, we have had, I like to think that improvements and engineered solutions will help, but we have had over the last 5 years. I mean, there's been days, I remember a Sunday specifically where Jim and I were out there during a heavy rainstorm and the water was up to our knees on places along this area that we're talking about. So it does have to be factored in for sure.
Oh, yeah.
A quick question, is any of this new mixed residential district touching the Paddleford Brook Greenway at all?
So Adeline, so the Paddleford Brook Greenway, actually this line where, so it follows Emerson Road, generally speaking, out at Sand Hill Road, roughly speaking. It kind of follows this northern line across from Campus Drive. So it would, this one parcel in like the tannish color would butt up to it, but the mixed residential would not at all be part of or adjacent to the Paddleford Brook Greenway.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, and then just a couple other questions. And again, these kind of tie back to the fact that at least on the east side of 332 and even on the west side to a lesser degree, because it's kind of tucked in between the industrial districts, but the mixed residential is adjacent to the form-based code district. So are there any elements from the form-based code that we want to continue into this new district? So one of those being the requirements for outdoor amenity spaces for certain types of development. So obviously this would not be applicable to a single family home or a 2-family home, but maybe for larger scale residential developments of requirement for a minimum outdoor space to support that residential development. So that's something that we incorporated into the form-based code for mixed use developments. Also, are there any special parking requirements that we want to incorporate similar to what we've incorporated into the form-based code? So again, for certain scales of development, having requirements for bike parking, and then requiring sidewalk connectivity within any of larger scale plan developments. So any thoughts on any of those, and whether you'd like us to add language really supporting those concepts within the zoning updates, or any other thoughts or ideas that anyone has?
I'll speak to sidewalk connectivity. As a former member of the Complete Streets Committee, I would like to require sidewalk connectivity for larger developments, at least.
Well,
I also
that,
think
it seems logical, since it is kind of a, as Greg was pointing out, kind of a self-contained community, so that would be a very important element, I would
Absolutely.
agree.
The other part of sidewalks is also, in the city, they require curb. So I was thinking on the retail side or whatever it, how's ever described here, you know, you should have curbs. You want curbs on all streets? You know, it's a question, right? It's caused some developers to move out of the city, to be honest with you. So it's a little risky. And then I would also ask for a Ontario County Sewer Department. They got a new guy over there now. And make sure we got a 20 or 50-year plan here for sewers. Because, you know, right now, I'm hearing different stories. I don't want to even repeat them, but I'm just hearing different stories.
And regarding parking, I think it's time that we, in all of our new development, require some electric vehicle parking. And probably have to think in terms of it more than we have in the past.
So Tesla announced yesterday, Karen, that they're going to have their chargers in place, you know, like in a residential location, and they've now decided to have fast food available while you're charging. and they put the Tesla brand on the fast food. It's unbelievable. So,
Well, you're going to put a little microwave on top of
I
each
guess
charger.
so. Right on top of the unit. I don't know.
Oh, Greg.
So going back to the electric vehicle parking, it's something that we're hearing more and more, and we've actually just drafted some zoning language for another community. And there's two approaches that can be taken to that if it's something you want to incorporate at all. One of them is simply, you know, if someone chooses to add electric vehicle charging stations, you know, what are the design parameters associated with doing so? So it's not requiring them, but it's saying if you choose to incorporate them in your parking area, that this is how we want it done, right? So it's just giving the guidance on how the town would like to see them installed and what the parameters are. One step further would obviously be to say, okay, you know, if you have a parking area that accommodates, you know, 15 or more parking spaces, you're required to do one electric vehicle charging station space, or, you know, whatever those parameters are. But, you know, depending on whether you want it addressed at all, as Karen just suggested, those are two different ways that could be incorporated. Maybe that's more of a, not specific to the mixed residential and the, you know, uptown area, but maybe something the town is looking at a broader scale or considering at a broader townwide scale. But just wanted to kind of throw those considerations out there.
The other thing regarding transportation, and we discussed this in the new master plan revised, are bicycle, I don't know what they call them, but where you can rent a bicycle somewhere and then you have places periodically where you can park them and
Bicycle sharing.
Yeah, exactly. I couldn't think of the big words. Thanks, Charlie. And the uptown area is a perfect place to start with something like that because it is a relatively confined area and has access to Main Street and Canandaigua and eventually the lake. So I think that as a forward-looking town, we need to think in terms of starting to provide these types of amenities to our residents.
Yeah, the bicycling as a whole, I'm probably not the right one to speak to it, but it seems like it's becoming more and more popular to have those accommodations, whether it's bike sharing or bike trails or bike friendly.
And e-bikes too, right?
Yeah, right.
It's not the pedaling being done by a motor. So that's the one I favor. And by the way, I did see Terry Finale pulling out a Shepherd Ford yesterday. I went in right after him and he's ordered the first F-150 EV. Okay.
That's right after I get that loan from you, Greg.
Oh, all right, there you go. There you go.
Charlie wouldn't give me the money, so I'll come to you.
That's right.
And
Go ahead.
go ahead, Doug.
I was just gonna say, I have a question. So I want to go back to Adeline's comment, and I 100% agree with Adeline, but I have a question, a follow-up question on sidewalk connectivity. So we've said that we want this area to be walkable, right? So we absolutely want to require sidewalks, I believe, but I want to hear from the group. Do we want to require sidewalks on both sides of the road? I think in this particular area, we say yes, because we
Yeah.
want it to be full access, full connectivity, but let's be clear about what we want for this area and tell the developers what they have to do.
I want it
I'd
as closest to a
second.
complete street as possible is what I would want. So potentially a place for bicycles to go as well as a sidewalk.
And there's a world famous City of Canandaigua 8 units can fit in the bike rack in front of Kershaw Park. So they estimated that. So let's not estimate ours.
Okay, so hearing any other thoughts on whether you want us to draft anything around electric vehicle parking? Or is that something more of a global townwide topic that you'd like to address? Or what are the thoughts on specific to this area?
Shouldn't we require some chargers with larger scale developments like an apartment complex? I would think we would certainly need them because people wouldn't be able to add their own in an apartment complex.
Yeah, single family houses, I mean, people will take care of their own, but
Right.
if this is going to be, if there are going to be any apartment complexes in this area, then yeah, you would probably specify that you have to have, I don't know what the right number is,
X per
2
unit.
or 3 or whatever, but most of the thrust of this, was my understanding, is residential. So from a commercial standpoint, maybe there'd be a few apartment buildings, but there's not going to be a whole lot of commercial. It's going to be more, residential oriented. And if it's going to be largely single family, I would think that they would have their own and take care of their own needs.
So we currently, even in the form-based district, do not have requirements for electric vehicle charging stations. We have bike parking requirements once parking areas reach a certain size. So maybe this goes back to that as part of a larger discussion. Do we want to require at a certain density of development or size of parking area that folks put in electric vehicle charging stations? Again, it's not something that we incorporated in the form-based code, which it would probably in many ways be maybe more applicable in that district than in this mixed residential district.
Well, that's a great question, Kimberly. And I guess as I'm listening to you guys talk about this for apartment buildings, I'm also thinking, and I don't know that we included it, for instance, like bus shelters for public transportation and those sorts of things for both school buses as well as public transportation for the apartment buildings and those types of things. Because to Adeline's point, somebody that's renting an apartment, they're not going to be able to ask the developer to do it. It'd be up to us to require it ahead of time. So.
Right.
Yeah.
Doug, do we currently, I know the city has an open, couple of, maybe 2 open charging stations. Does the town currently have any public charging stations for electric vehicles?
So not that have been installed by the town of Canandaigua. There are currently 3 charging stations, to the best of my knowledge, in the town of Canandaigua. It is my understanding that they're open to the public, including one that is behind Vision Nissan. But they're all on private property.
Yeah, I don't think the town should be installing them. That should be a commercial enterprise.
A lot of communities are installing them because there have been a number of grant resources that have provided the infrastructure to do them at no cost for the installation. So there are quite a few communities that do have open access electric vehicle charging stations currently across the state. But again, this is one of those kind of where a tipping point as it relates to the charging stations. And you know, a lot of communities don't have regulations within their zoning currently as the technology ramps up and is more widely utilized. So this could be, with this update, it could be an opportunity to incorporate some of that language, or again, and I really look to the town for guidance on this, or is it something that maybe the town wants to look at more holistically town-wide and incorporate into the code moving forward? We can certainly provide some draft language in here for consideration. If everyone thinks that's appropriate.
If we did it townwide, though, it would not apply to the form-based code district, correct? Because
We'd
No,
want it,
but-
yes, we'd have to add it in there too.
so we'd have to add it in there and then
Yeah.
potentially do something either townwide or in this particular. I mean, I think honestly, anywhere someone's building a large apartment complex, wherever we put it, it probably makes sense to require some sort of electronic charging station. But that's based on the size of the development, not based on anything else. So.
I think it's something the developer might want to have if everything keeps trending in that direction. I mean, we've even
Sure.
talked about installing one here at the bank here in Farmington. I don't know that we're going to, but we've had the discussion. You know, it would be open to the public, but I think that's a conversation more and more commercial businesses are probably going to have,
I
and
believe that,
developers.
I think that any apartment building actually should at least be required to have the infrastructure for electric parking, because you know, come on, it is the sign of the future, and we hope these apartment buildings stay around for more than 4 or 5 years. So why wouldn't you plan ahead and at least have the electric capability at a prearranged site so that you can draw into that if you decide to put some parking in? Maybe that's a step to take. I personally think that they should have some electric parking spaces required.
Why don't we go ahead and draft some language, and
Sure.
whether that gets inserted into this district, inserted into the form-based code, inserted into the zoning code, we can at least provide some language as a starting point for further discussion and consideration at the town level.
Thanks for bringing
good.
it up, Karen.
That sounds good.
Okay. Okay.
All right, I
So
have
I-
one last thoughts and ideas. And this
Sure.
comes from my wandering on Sunday night, I think it was. And that was Blue Heron Park. You know, the town needs to get a little focused on that park if we want to make it an asset for the community. It's a tougher park to get going, I understand that. And just the pathway that's in the park, I didn't walk all the way around, and the maintenance of the park, you want to kind of make that one of the shining stars of Uptown, right? That there is a place to go out of your apartment that's hot or whatever it is, and you want to go outside and you have to have a place. So I would just encourage the town in totality to, you know, figure out the prioritization of how we get that to match what we're trying to do for the whole Uptown activity.
Greg, you'll be happy to know that that was in the 2020 budget for us to focus on Blue Heron Park, and we had to cut it because of COVID, but we put it back in for the 2021, and we're just getting ready to get started.
Okay, great.
Okay, so then moving on to the industrial and business park. So this is our area in blue and purple. And the intent of this is not to change the underlying zoning districts, which currently exist within the code, but to create a design overlay. So the underlying, you know, permitted uses, the bulk and use regulations, they stay as is. We are not touching those, but we are just adding a layer of design considerations. So the way that these have been drafted is they would be adopted as part of the zoning code as an official overlay district. So it's written more in terms of shalls and musts as opposed to just guidelines. If that ends up being something that, you know, the town is really thinking these are more guidelines, we can change some of that language as applicable, and it just ultimately wouldn't be adopted as part of the zoning code. So again, retaining the existing zoning district, the overlay is broken into, and again, based off your existing language. So we used some of your other existing overlays as a guide to ensure consistency within the code and the organization. So we have a purpose statement, a description of intent, interpretation of boundaries, and then the actual written guidelines, which are broken into really building specific guidelines and then site specific guidelines. And again, these are layered on top of the bulk and use regulations. So the purpose of the overlay district is to provide supplemental regulations to the underlying industrial and business park zoning districts within the uptown corridor in the town as defined on the zoning map. So it is not all of the, going back, you do have other industrial zoned areas within the town. So these overlay is limited to this area on this map. So just want to make sure that that is clear, unless at some future time you decided to expand that. But for our purposes here, we are focused on that area within the uptown map. So the intent of the overlay district is really to promote high quality architectural and site design that's compatible with the surrounding area, recognizing the surrounding area is intended to be walkable, inviting, and a mix of different types of commercial and residential uses. It's intended to promote safe, functional, and attractive development, and also encourages sustainable site and building design to reduce any negative environmental impacts. So the building.
Can we make a comment?
Sure.
The architectural, go back to the prior slide, please. The site plan encourages high quality architectural and site design. And yet the vast majority of that, with the exception of where Akoustis is, the vast majority of it already has its architectural tone, I'll call it, right? And I wouldn't consider a pole barn construction to be of architectural significance. So I just want to make it real, right? And I have another comment on top of that one, which is as you interface with that existing architecture, what's really important, in my opinion, is the transition as you go from what it was to what it's going to become. And those streets of North Road, as an example, Airport Road, are critical roads to set that parameter at. But to require, or you only use words encourage, so I apologize, but encourages high quality. I think everybody would encourage that, right? The practicality of it is they all can't be like in the city where Canandaigua Wines is with their office area up there, okay? It's now been sold away anyways. But my point is that we got to be a little thoughtful to represent the industrial people that want to be there for industrial reasons. I'll just put it that way.
Yep. And that's a good segue, into the conversation, right? As we walk through some of the design parameters that we're proposing and understanding, okay, is this too far in one direction? Are we requiring too much? Do we need to claw back on some of this? And that's really where we're looking for this group's guidance moving forward. So we've talked about that in the past too, right? Recognizing there needs to be an appropriate balance between what you're requiring these types of uses to do with what you're hoping to achieve in the built environment. So I think that's a good segue, and probably will more discussion around that as we get into some of these building guidelines. So our first area of focus is really on the primary facade. So the building facade that you're seeing from the street. And the goal of the design standards here are really to avoid large undifferentiated wall surfaces, again, on the primary facade. So what we're proposing is that structures that are more than 50 feet wide on the primary facade would be required to break up that facade with different delineations within the facade and different treatments. So it doesn't look like just a massive wall along the streetscape. I'm going to bounce back and forth here to some of these images. So here, for example, right, this wall exceeds 50 feet, breaking up just with kind of a minor exposure here of jumping out a little bit. You can see the changes in the facade in this building as well, as opposed to here where you really do have just a massive industrial wall. So it is this type of treatment along the primary frontage, along the street frontage, that we're trying to avoid ultimately. And then not requiring all of those different delineations like a canopy or arcade, but those would be allowed as part of the treatment for the wall service. From a materials perspective, masonry, stone, that's either natural or faux stone, concrete, prefabricated steel panels, corrugated metal. We'll talk more about that. Stucco, ephes, glass, all appropriate materials. So looking again, back at these examples, you've got a stucco example, an ephes example, concrete, and then here you've got a metal building, although you can see it's broken up with natural materials along the primary frontage. So one of the questions we have for you is that list of materials appropriate? And if so, when you're looking at materials like, concrete or the corrugated steel, do you want to require that the use of them on the primary facade is limited? Maybe it's 50% of the primary facade, and it needs to be balanced with another material like a fake or real stone or masonry. So I can go back to that list and we can talk a little bit more about materials and any thoughts on that.
Kimberly, I think there's one other element here, which is the measurement of the distance from the road where you're viewing that building to where the building, it's 500 feet back. It doesn't make a difference if it's stone or anything else, right? But if it's on the road, and that's what you're trying to accomplish here, right? Is if it's closer to the road, you're trying to accomplish a differentiation that makes it look less industrial. But if it sits back like Pactiv sits back, even if they built a new Pactiv today, they probably wouldn't do the exterior differently because it's not visually impactful to the person that's on that road.
Yeah.
That's my view.
Okay. So if others agree with that sentiment, we can add in language that, the use of materials or, just general conformance with the building site design regulations for primary facades be tied to setback. And we would just have to set what that setback line is. Is it anything that's set back within 100 feet, 200 feet? And that would be further.
Some setbacks, some landscaping, some berming, all of that
Right.
stuff may be able to be incorporated.
Right.
How do others feel about that?
I would generally agree with what Greg said and what Andy said. I think, just thinking out loud, if we can attract industry here, we'd all be better off. I wouldn't make it too restrictive in that sense.
100% agree.
Okay.
And I have to tell a little story. 1991, it was a cold winter night, February, and I was at a planning board meeting on the planning board. Well before Terry got to those planning board meetings, but early on. And the point is that we decided to put shrubs and then trees in front of David Janecko's warehousing facility on 332. And we actually specified the height of the tree that had to go in there. And I felt bad for David when we did that to him because he's trying to make a business start, right? Or he wants to make it go, right? And if he's got to spend $1,000 on landscaping, it makes a difference to these folks. So I just ask us to take that perspective. It is industrial. It's going to be mixed use industrial. I get that part. But, sometimes they don't always align with the objectives of the owner of the building who's focused on delivering a product to a market. That's all.
Yep.
So I would agree, our industrial zone needs to be our least restrictive zone
Yeah.
for these things, because I mean, we want to encourage the development. We want to have the money coming into our economy.
Right.
The one question I do have, though, when we talk about setbacks, unfortunately, a couple of these industrial zones and or the business park zone do directly abut some of the residential zones without a commercial in between. So when we talk about setbacks, my only concern is if they're setting back, are we also talking about distance from a neighboring housing development or homes? Because they could be set back from the road, but then pushed right into somebody's backyard. So that's my only concern about that.
Yep, and again, just to reiterate, we are not making any recommended changes to the underlying district. So all of the bulk and use requirements and the setback requirements are set forth in the underlying industrial district. And I think that is 150 feet for front setback on 332. And I'm not sure, we'd have to go back and look at the underlying district in more detail for the other areas that are identified. But again, we're not changing or recommending changes to the underlying district.
Well, and just so you know too, so our town code currently requires buffering between exactly the scenario that Adeline referenced, and the planning board gets to decide that. There's a minimum, but the planning board takes that into consideration.
Yeah, and we've added some strong language in here, which may be stronger than we want to go, but we can talk about that when we get to the site guidelines.
I just want to say I do agree with the variation in appearance from the road. But I also, from what Greg said about Dave Janeco, I frankly don't feel sorry for Dave Janeco. I am really in favor of landscaping that fits the area where the building is being built. And if it's going to go in the uptown area, you have to think in terms of landscaping because it's such a diverse area and you want to make sure it's acceptable to all of the occupants of the area. So I think landscaping is an important issue to include. You know, I'm not even a member of this committee, so maybe you don't have to listen to me. but I think landscaping is an important issue
Absolutely.
to include.
Yep. And we do talk about landscaping in the site design section.
So on the landscaping side, just another story, you know, when I built the solar farm on County Road 10, I was told by the planning board to put in a 20-foot wide buffer of flowers. Okay, frankly, it's overstretched in the industrial zone. Okay, you know, so I just don't want that power to go to those folks that make those determinations. These are not suggestions. These are determinations you will put in. And I can give you a whole story about that. I'm not going to go that deep on it. But my point is that remember who the audience is and who's the user and what is the purpose. That's all I ask.
Exactly. I agree. I agree with that. Yes.
Okay. Okay, so with regards to site design guidelines, and again, some of these may ultimately get taken out, but because of the desire to create a strong walkable mixed-use uptown area, right, where employees, these industrial uses can walk out the front door, walk to 332 or Fire Hall Road, grab lunch, grab something at the pharmacy on their lunch break. You know, we wanted to take some of that into consideration, recognizing, right, these are still industrial users that have a job to do with their site, but so proposing, you know, and requiring that there's a strong connection between the building entry and the primary street, which ideally would include a sidewalk to strengthen that connectivity between the users inside the building and the larger uptown area. If there's multiple buildings on a site, there should be pedestrian connections between the structures and the parking areas to create and again foster that walkability and ease of use. So any initial thoughts or reactions to those requirements being incorporated?
I think it's good to also require the pedestrian connectors again. But I will mention the thing that no one ever likes to talk about that I've been asking about since I was on the Complete Streets Committee. We do not currently have a town policy for who maintains sidewalks that I'm aware of. And someone eventually is going to have to address that with the added sidewalks, so.
Well, actually, let me just real quick, and Adeline, I can talk to you offline too, but that has been discussed. There actually is a law that was adopted by the town board in 1997 that we started enforcing about 3 years ago. Sidewalks are to be maintained by the adjacent or the landowner. So, and we can talk about that separately, but that is a law that we have begun enforcing, and we've been making people aware of, especially along Route 332. And we have cited multiple businesses on 332 for not keeping the sidewalks clean this past winter. So, but we can talk about that separately. But.
In the middle of the COVID, you did that, Doug? Tough guy.
Yes, we did. We absolutely did.
So Doug, just a quick question on that, not to belabor the point, but is that also like if the sidewalk becomes uneven in front of a business, they have to fix that as well?
No, then the town takes care of that. So.
Okay. In the city of Geneva, just for a fun fact, when you sell a property there, maybe some of you know, there's a sidewalk inspection.
Yeah. Yeah, the city of Geneva actually does require that the landowner do full maintenance, including even if they have to replace it. You know, the town of Canandaigua takes care of that. Our highway department takes care of that. For instance, there's a sidewalk in my development where there's a piece broken, and I know it's on the list for a highway to patch it and fix it. But the actual snow removal is the responsibility of the adjacent landowner.
Thank you.
Well, there have been discussions in the past of establishing sidewalk districts, much like our water districts or any other lighting districts, you know, where the cost would go back to the landowners, but that's never been integrated into that 97 local law. Maybe it needs to be in the future, though. I mean,
well, and to Adeline's point, and she probably, I mean, truthfully, you just wouldn't have known this. None of us knew the law existed. It was actually not part of the town code, but it had been adopted by the town board. So it was something we had to go back and take care of. So.
yeah.
Okay. So loading in service areas, we've also addressed and stated that loading dock space and service areas shall be located on non-primary facades. So sorry, I was reading that incorrectly, but we don't want them on the primary facades. We want them towards the rear of the building, which we recognize may not always be feasible, either based on lot size or the use and how, you know, a specific use needs to move around the site. So could be approved by the planning board with appropriate screening, but in general, loading dock space service areas would not be located on the primary facade. And then the second bullet, you know, might be too strong, you know, where we're saying storage, whether it be trailers or containers, cannot be stored or utilized on site. So, you know, if that ends up being a need or something you feel might be something that industrial users are strongly opposed to, even though we say that, you know, they could ask for permission, we can certainly take that regulation out. Any thoughts on those?
My view's the same. I don't have no problem with the first one, loading dock bays, blah, blah, blah.
Yeah.
But forcing, you know, there are times when they have product that comes in at them that's in a high volume for whatever reason. And
Yeah.
if they don't have any room in the lot and not going to be able to put it in a certain location on a lot, you know, that inhibits that business. Now, I'm not in favor of, you know, what goes on in like what is it? Farm right there on 332 Central Tractor. And, you know, they have I'll say around New Year's, they'd always have the orange trucks come up from Florida and they would be selling out of the orange trucks. So that's a retail, so it's not industrial. But industrial has got to have some flexibility here
Yeah.
to
Yep.
meet their needs. Boy,
Sure. Okay, we can take that second part out.
Yeah, if somebody happens to locate on a corner lot where you have two streets, you know,
Two
maybe,
streets, yep.
you know, it's a problem. You're gonna see the loading dock, you know, so.
Right.
But there can be some screening added to minimize the impact, I would think.
Yep.
In a small town like ours, we're going to have economic development where a business probably or maybe would need a loading dock in the front. And there it needs to be balanced by the entrance facade and some greenery. Some, you know, there are ways to mitigate the negative effect it has on the view from the street. And I think we're just going to have to help builders and businesses be creative in how they address that issue. But I can absolutely think that there are going to be businesses, especially in that area, that come and are going to need a front loading dock. So, you know, that has to be a thought in the back of our mind, and it has to be, there has to be a way to help these businesses deal with that.
Oh, yeah, I would agree with that. I mean, the other thing is that if you're driving by 35,
Exactly.
40 miles an hour. And if that site bothers you that much, well, God bless you, but you know, hey, most people won't.
Except that this is going to be an area where it's very conducive for walking and bicycling.
Well,
So,
we're talking the industrial areas, though. I mean, we're
yeah,
back
well,
to
that's true.
Oxford Road. I mean, that's not all that, you know.
But you know, if you drive by Pactiv, your eyes are not drawn to a loading dock. And I don't even know if they have, I
No.
don't even know what their front facade is, because they have that big, beautiful pond with all the geese in front of it. So, and the same way with the sausage company, they have a beautiful green lawn out in front. So it reduces the negativity of their loading dock, which is visible from Brickyard Road.
Yeah.
So that's all I'm saying. We need to be creative in how we work with these businesses.
Yeah,
If
oh, yeah.
they're building, yeah, and I know, Terry, you understand that, but
Yeah.
I don't know how you would put that into a document.
Into words? Yeah.
Yes, exactly.
Tough, Karen, you're right.
That's not my job.
We should be so lucky as to have these people beating down our doors, you know.
Yeah.
Okay, so we will amend that. And then with regards to, you know, kind of in that same vein of that conversation, you know, refuse storage located in the rear and buffered from view of parking facilities, walks, and adjacent properties. And based on that past discussion, we can certainly soften that language. You know, we would like to see garbage be located within an enclosure. So that's screened 100%. But aside from that, I think we can take your comments in this discussion into play and refine this section and really just soften it and make sure there's enough guidance, but enough flexibility written in as well. With regards to off-street parking, so again, because this is going to be this overlay part of the existing code, the off-street parking requirements, number of spaces, et cetera, will just refer to the off-street parking requirements in the existing code. Again, not saying it's a must, but when possible, locating parking at the rear of structures. And again, depending on the type of use, this may or may not be a possibility. Also, whether there's the need for loading and the interference between parking and loading areas would come into play. Landscaping and buffering, so meeting the existing buffering requirements in the town code, we have added, and again, this might be stricter than folks are comfortable with, but you know, to avoid the look of just an island of asphalt parking, we have added requirements for parking islands within parking areas of 10 or more. I don't know what folks' thoughts on that are, and if that's something that you're okay leaving in as a requirement or would prefer not to require. And that parking lot, it could be, the number could be changed, right? It could be parking lots greater than 30 spaces need to incorporate a landscape island. It doesn't have to be 10 or more. Any initial thoughts on that?
Well, this is in our existing code.
With regards to the landscape islands?
Yeah. Is it?
Okay.
I'm not sure. Has a question mark at the end of it.
Oh, I don't think it's required in your existing code.
Yeah.
So this would be a kind of added requirement specific to this overlay. Again, specific to Uptown and just the general desired character for this area.
Yeah.
I like it. I don't know if we need to keep that at 10 parking spaces for the industrial district though, so.
It could be 30. Does that seem more reasonable?
I would defer to the people who know more than I do about that topic, but I just that seems more than is needed in an industrial. So
Maybe split the difference at 20.
Okay, we can update that. And again, when you get the text version, you can weigh in and think more about that. Lighting, so lighting again would fall back within your existing code. None of these should be particularly cumbersome. The kind of big change would probably be the lighting of pedestrian walkways being required. So if you do have that walkway connecting the front entry to the sidewalk and the public right of way, there would be some requirements for using pedestrian scaled lighting along that walkway to ensure it's safe and accessible even in dark.
It looks good.
And then lastly, this is an easy one. So no additional signage requirements. So this would just fall back to your existing zoning code for signage. And this was just based on some previous conversations we had that I think put us in the direction that you didn't want to really layer on additional signage requirements or too many additional restrictions for signage in this area.
Yeah.
So that is it. We will make modifications to the narrative that we've prepared based on this conversation. And then we will get that out. Sarah, should it still go to you to distribute to the group, or I could send it to Oksana?
I don't mind. Yeah, either way, or maybe both of us.
Okay, we'll do that. We'll get it to both of you to distribute to the group, and then you'll be able to, spend a little more time with it and some of the nuances in the language. And then I'm thinking we can meet again fairly soon, within the next few weeks to do a more detailed review based on your reviews. Does that time frame work for folks?
Sure. Yep. Sounds good.
Okay. All right. Any other kind of wrap up questions? Okay, great. We'll get something over to you soon and we'll look forward to reconnecting.
Thanks, Kimberly.
Thank you.
Everybody.
Thanks, everyone. Have a good day.
You too. Bye.